Hello, welcome to another episode of the Intel with Greg Cosell on the Inside the Birds platform. I'm Jeff Mosher alongside Adam Kaplan. With us, as always, is Greg Cosell to break down prospects for the 2025 NFL Draft. And in this episode, a very, very important position. Greg, we know the teams that are best in the NFL have good offensive lines, elite offensive lines. The Eagles fall into that group, and other teams as well. So we're going to go through offensive tackle in this year's draft. And the conversation Adam and I recently had on a podcast is a lot. There are positions, and I'm sure you would agree, where you can overcome your maybe lack of measurables, length with great athleticism. But in offensive tackle, it's pretty rare if you don't fulfill a certain criteria of measurement, size, and length, and hand and arms. To be a first rounder if you don't have that. I mean, this is one of those rare positions where it's hard to overcome if you don't have the right measurables.
You know, and through film study, and you guys know I've been doing it a long time, and through conversations through the years now with coaches, because offensive line is a position, and obviously there's three different positions, but that whole group of three different offensive line positions is something I keep trying to learn more and more about. Just because that's not, you don't grow up saying, oh, I want to study offensive line. Just like most 8-year-olds, when they start playing football, don't say, I want to put my hand in the dirt and be an offensive lineman. It's a learned position. But the one thing that really pops up, and this is specific to the tackle position, which is sort of the swimsuit position for the offensive line, the tackle position, certainly left tackle through the years, is teams want their tackles to be able to protect one-on-one on third down. That's the critical element for tackle position in the NFL, because every offensive coordinator in this league, when it comes to third and long, wants to send all 5 eligible receivers out as primary receivers. They do not want to have to chip. They do not want to have to keep someone in, meaning a back or a tight end. They want to be able to send all 5 out. And of course, that then expands your route concepts and your game plan. If you have to start keeping a tight end into chip, then all of a sudden a really good receiving tight end, let's say it's George Kittle and you're uncomfortable at left tackle. That's probably not the best example because they have Trent Williams, but he was hurt last year for the last 6-7 games. Then all of a sudden, George Kittle can't be a primary receiver when it's 3rd and 9. And you want George Kittle to be that guy, And you mentioned the Eagles, they don't have to do that. They have 2 tackles who can pass protect one-on-one on 3rd and 9. So I've spoken to coaches who say, hey, if I don't feel after studying an offensive tackle that he can pass protect one-on-one on 3rd down, then he's not even on our board because we don't want that guy, Right. So now, of course, that raises the question of how many guys can do that. And obviously the number is not going to be 20, but that's really a major criteria for how coaches look at tackles in the NFL.
Greg, when you're watching tape, because Jeff and I were talking about this the other day, where teams, they have certain arm length for tackles that sort of the line that they're, if it's under 34, it's a question mark. If it's under 33, it's like, forget about it.
Yeah.
Can you tell sometimes when, without looking at the measurables, you go, wow, that guy looks short. Can you tell that at all? You can.
Yes.
Really?
I mean, obviously, I can't tell the difference between 33 and a quarter and 33 and a half, but sure, you can tell when it's meaningful. And this is something else. There's 64 starting offensive tackles in the NFL. Only 4 have arm length less than 33 inches. Only 4. So we can debate whether there's a difference between 32 and 5/8 and 33 and a quarter. We can have that debate. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not an offensive tackle guru, but the bottom line is there's only 4 offensive tackles in the NFL that have arm length less than 33 inches. I know 2 of them offhand. One's Alaric Jackson, who just signed a deal with the Rams, and the other is Raymond from the Colts. And I can't remember the other 2. Sorry, they're not popping into my head right now. Yeah. But I've spoken to some coaches who, and this gets to the Will Campbell conversation, which we'll get to momentarily, but this particular coach I spoke to, who's been doing it for 30 plus years, told me that I just feel like a guy under 33 falls into the exception category, and I'm just not sure I want to draft an exception. So it's, different people have different points of view on that, obviously, but I don't think it's an accident that there's only 4 tackles in the NFL with arm length less than 33. I don't think that's an accident.
Wow.
No, definitely not. And it's not just measurements, right? There's a whole science behind an offensive lineman. Generally in pass protection is always going backward, and if the defender is just able to get his arms into the chest before the offensive lineman can because of arm length, like a boxing match, right? When you're facing somebody who's got much
like a jab. It's like a jab in boxing.
Yeah, you're already going backwards, so then you get pushed further backwards and put on your butt, no matter how strong you are.
Yeah, I mean, for people who are old like I am, Jeff, who might remember Thomas Hearns as a boxer, with that left jab, it seemed like his arm length was about 100, inches. I mean, when he jabbed, you know. But and we know Joe Thuney's not a tackle, okay? But we're just making an arm length point here. Think of the Super Bowl, those shots where he stuck his arm out and Sweat had his arm and Thuney almost, literally couldn't reach him, because Sweat was into his chest and Thuney almost couldn't reach him. Now that's an extreme example because Thuney's not a tackle, and I bet his arm length is 31, somewhere in that range. But that can happen when that arm length to coaches is an issue.
100%. And that does bring us to our first guy, Will Campbell out of LSU, a very productive tackle at LSU, and some would say a top 15, 20 pick, perhaps. We'll see what happens. But Adam, what is the official measurement of his arm length?
Yeah, 32 and 5/8. Boy, that is, man, less than 33, man. It's hard. It's hard to not be playing guard when you have that kind of arm length.
Well, it's funny you say that because I heard from some people that they looked at him like they looked at Skoronski when he came out of Northwestern, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Skoronski obviously moved inside. He was a starting tackle in the Big Ten for 3 years. Really solid player. Was drafted as a guard. And that's what he's played in Tennessee since they drafted him. This particular coach said that he views Will Campbell exactly like that. Now, I guarantee there will be some teams that see him as a tackle because the tape is good on Will Campbell. It's not. I wouldn't say it's sensational. It's good. And it's funny. You do talk about arm length. The guy he had a lot of trouble with was Landon Jackson. And I watched that tape, and he really struggled at times with Landon Jackson, who's 6'6.5". I don't know Jackson's arm length right off the top of my head, but it was clear that was a little bit of an issue for Will Campbell. But he's very controlled. He's very composed in pass protection. He's got good balance. He's got good body control. I would say even though his arms are shorter, he knows how to use his hands well. I think he's got a good anchor. He was able to shut down power. He's got a sturdy lower half, but you get into that question. Is he a tackle? Is he a guard? A lot of people I respect are evaluating him as a guard.
Adam, do you think this could be the guy? There's always that one guy who, for whatever reason, on the mocks, on the expert, like everybody, he's top 10, but all of a sudden the slide begins, and you wonder. There's one guy who just goes way lower than what people think going in. Do you think arm length could make Will Campbell that guy? Because a lot of teams don't want to draft a guy who's just a guard in the first round. Some will, but some won't.
Yeah, Tennessee did with Skoronski. He was a top 10 pick.
He was. Yeah, and see, and it goes to show you that it only takes one team. Like ordinarily would never draft a guard in the top 10. But if you think he's going to be a starter for 8, 10, 12 years, you're not so worried about it. Whereas with Will Campbell, okay, he's got good tape, as Greg talked about, considered to be in terms of a grade or a talent, a top 10 player. So theoretically, yes, he should go in the top 10. Now, could he drop out? This draft, guys, I mean, we've talked about this now for a number of weeks, maybe months. It's just not on blue chip players. It's just not a strong draft. So their 32 picks are going to be made. I know teams would love to trade down. Good luck. I still say he goes in the top 10 and will play guard. And Skoronski was a good example of it. Good.
And there will be teams that see him as a tackle. I mean, look, at the end of the day, people are going to say, and this is very valid, and his tape is good. Like I said, it's not spectacular. It's good. But he was a 3-year starter in clearly the best conference in the country. And was a good, solid football player. Again, you can believe or not believe things that you read, but I've read that New England views him as a tackle, and they need O-line help, and they draft fourth. It's very possible New England drafts him and puts him in a tackle. I mean, that's very, very possible. Vrabel was there when they drafted Skoronski, so I don't know, how Vrabel sees Campbell. But the bottom line is the guy's a good football player. You just got to decide, the arm length issue, and we could debate that. Like I said, we could debate it for the next hour, and you still wouldn't have an answer.
Jeff, if Isaiah Wynn, I know this staff was not there in New England, 6'2 3/4 inch arms. Okay, he was 6'2 and a half. 6'2 and 3/4, depending who was measuring. So under 6'3". Belichick drafted him to be a left tackle. He would later move to guard. That was obviously a mistake.
Yep.
And his arm length was under 34. So it's really an interesting debate, what you do with arm length here.
All right, let's move on to the next guy whose athletic testing was through the roof from Missouri, ArmandMembou, if I have that pronounced correctly. ArmandMembou.
Membo, yeah.
Membo.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a really long wingspan too of 82 inches, but his testing was through the roof. For he's a really interesting player too. I mean, again, he's a guy that I think that he'll be looked at as a guy who can play right tackle, which he did. But there'll be some teams that look at him as a guard as well. He kind of. I finished evaluating him, and my last line in my transition was, is there a comparison to be made with Elijah Vera Tucker coming out of USC? And Vera Tucker was a guy that played both tackle and guard in college and ultimately made the move to guard in the NFL. My guess is Membo's going to end up playing right tackle. I mean, he's got good traits. Like I said, you don't know, but there's much to like. He's got one of those dense, powerful builds. So he's got natural strength and power. He's got heavy hands. He's one of those guys that you have to watch a lot of him because he's just like, you don't look at him in the same way you look at, Trent Williams or Laramie Tunsil or Elaine Johnson, where you can watch 10 plays and you go, wow, these guys are just really good players. He's sort of a consistency of fundamental execution. He's one of those guys. He just, you just have to watch him, and eventually you go, this guy's a good player. So again, I think it becomes team and scheme specific as to whether he lines up at tackle or at guard. My guess is he'll get a shot at tackle because there's not that many of them in the draft.
What keeps him? I'm just wondering what keeps him from being a left tackle, because he seems to have really good athleticism, and he started to tackle. Is it size? Is it lack of experience?
I would say lateral range. I think that's not his best trait. He's a really good run blocker, but the lateral range, I think, is something that is, teams will look at. When you don't have lateral range, you know what happens a lot, Jeff? When you get challenged on the high side quickly by speed, you tend to drop your head and lean. It's just kind of a natural body reaction. And he had a tendency to do that at times. And again, I'm not an offensive line coach, so I don't know, what a coach might say, I can correct. I mean, coaches think they can correct everything. That's why they're coaches. And they should think that way, by the way. But, I think that's the one issue with him, because he's so dense. His body type is dense. It's not really an athletic body type. He's not a non-athlete, but, he doesn't have that sort of fluidity that when you look at the really good tackles, you just kind of see the fluidity.
A couple things here. 33.5-inch arms, which makes him certainly questionable to be left tackle. Our list of players, really teams are going through this. A majority of these players are going to go in the first 3 rounds, are probably going to be looked at not just as one position player on the offensive line. It might be guard and tackle. It's just the way it is. It's an odd class this season because of that.
Yeah, very much so. All right, the next guy, experienced offensive tackle out of Texas, Kelvin Banks. Greg, I've gotten just myself mixed reactions on him from people I spoke to. What do you think?
Yeah, I liked Kelvin Banks. Now, again, I've heard some people say he's a guard too, but I think he's a tackle. But that's just, again, that's my opinion. He's a very athletic kid. I mean, I think that that he can pass protect one-on-one. I mean, he's really athletic. He's got smooth footwork. He's got lateral range. There's three kinds of sets, essentially, guys. There's a short set. There's what's called a 45-degree set, and there are vertical sets. Vertical sets are usually, long yardage where the quarterback takes, those 7-step drops, if it's 3rd and 9. And I think that he did a good job controlling the edge, closing the arc. What I really liked, and this is taught a lot because I've talked to O-line coaches, I thought he did a really good job in keeping his inside right foot vertical as long as he possibly could so that he did not overset and give up the inside counter. So many offensive tackles, if they're worried about speed and they know their own bodies, so if they're not lateral range athletes, they really try to, overset because they don't want to be beat off the edge. Mm-hmm. So what happens is they give up the inside. And, and that's what happens. And, really good pass rushers, they study all this. I remember when DeMarcus Ware was in our broadcast boot camp years ago, and during the lunch break, because I wanted to learn, I cornered him, and he spent 15 minutes telling me in amazing detail about how he studies offensive tackles and their footwork and their hands. And he had it down to an exact science. And so, offensive tackles, they have to study pass rushers the same way, and I think Banks can be a left tackle. I really like Kelvin Banks. And the other thing I've heard is he's a class A human being, great kid. And I think that, coaches, the coaches have to work with these guys every day. They don't want to work with jerks. That's the bottom line. They're with him every single day, and he's, from what I've heard, he's just A+ kid.
Jeff, most offensive linemen that we've heard about over the years, it's funny Greg mentions that, they're like pretty good. Like they're pretty good dudes,
They're a different breed of cat, though. They're a different breed of cat.
Yeah. It's funny. I definitely got flashbacks of years back when we did the pregame show with Trey Thomas, hearing Greg talk about Kelvin Banks using that inside, or what Trey would always call the post leg,
right? And
the kick count and the timing and the rhythm of that post leg. And Trey always talked about oversetting, being, obviously an obstacle if you don't have your post leg kicking at the right time.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, that's what coach, you never want to turn to the sideline right away. I mean, because, then you're just giving up the inside counter. You're just giving it up. And I thought Banks did a really nice job with that. I like him, and I think he's a left tackle. I guess we'll see how it plays out, but I think he's a left tackle.
So the next guy, and you mentioned left tackle, I'll be curious to see how you see from your tape study. You see Josh Connelly, how he lines up at the next level.
Well, here's what I'll say: the two most athletic tackles in this draft, we're talking about athleticism, are Josh Connelly and JoshSimmons. You've got to be named Josh to be athletic in this draft.
Apparently,
yeah. So Conerly is, I think, to me, he's another guy that I think he's going to play left tackle. I mean, he has light, quick feet, easy movement traits. He's, like I said, he and JoshSimmons are the two best pure athletes at the left tackle position. I think he's got the pass protection chops to control quality edge pass rushers one-on-one. On 3rd down and pure pass situations, which, as we've been saying, is the litmus test. I liked what he put on tape, and I thought he improved as the 2024 season progressed. Athleticism, movement, pass protection is among the best of any of the offensive tackles in this draft class. I think he's got to get stronger overall. He's got to anchor a little better. I think, he's got to get stronger, just as a player, because he's kind of light in his bottom half. His legs don't really look like the legs of an offensive tackle. So there'll be some questions about his anchor strength versus speed to power, and they're legit questions. And you always get into, and I've learned a lot about this over the years. You always get into hand placement, and I think that needs to be more consistently precise. Sometimes it's just too wide, and once you get your hands too wide, what happens, guys? This, guys get into your chest, and if you start letting guys get into your chest, you can be the strongest guy on the planet, and it doesn't matter.
By the way, Josh Connelly, and this is where the guard point is, 33.5-inch arms, which is not ideal. It's under 34. That's going to be a problem for some clubs. But again, his tape's really good.
He's like I said, he and JoshSimmons, who we can mention next if you like. They're the two most athletic guys. You see it immediately. You watch JoshSimmons, Jeff, And you see it particularly in the run game, the guy moves up to the second level. He looks like a running back. I mean, he's really an athletic guy.
Let's go there.
So I wanted to ask you about Josh Simmons real quick, though. It does sound like we're describing with a couple of these guys, like sort of this year's versions of a Rashawn Slater, guys who are pretty good athletes, but just a little bit short arm to make you wonder. And Slater did a good job rookie year playing tackle. I think they moved him to right tackle, right, Adam? By year two?
Slater's the left tackle because they have all.
I thought they had moved him, but I know his play has been up and down. But he was another guy who I think was right around that 33-inch arm length, and there were some questions. Yep. All right, so go ahead.
Josh Simmons is that guy. I mean, he played 5.5 games this year. He got hurt in the Oregon game, and then he was out for the season. But you're dealing with a guy that has really quick, light feet, really easy movement. I mean, especially as a run blocker, you really notice it. I mean, it just looks easy the way he works up to the second level, the way he pulls. He just has great mobility, great balance to block linebackers and safeties, and he's good in pass pro too. I mean, he's because he's such a good athlete. They talk about in your kick slides, particularly on the 45-degree and the vertical sets. They always talk about knee benders. You want guys to be able to bend their knees. You don't want them to be upright because then they're too stiff and they can't really react. You hear the phrase reactive athleticism a lot when you talk about players. He's got that because he's a knee bender and he's just got really quick feet. So it's a shame that he ended up missing, because they played a lot of games, obviously, Ohio State, because they won the national championship. But he's a really good prospect based on tape.
It feels like, Greg, if he checks out medically and everything, it sounds to me like you're almost describing Simmons and Banks in particular as safer OT left tackle prospects than some of the earlier guys we spoke about.
Yeah, look, you watch someone like Will Campbell, the tape's good. I mean, it's not like, oh my God, what's the problem with Will Campbell? Like I said, I don't think Will Campbell falls into the, Trent Williams, Laramie Tunsil category, or Delane Johnson for that matter, when he came out and what he's done in his career. Lane Johnson, is one of the best tackles we've seen, and he's done it every single year, basically, since he's been a rookie. The guy's phenomenal. He does something that I saw another guy do, and I can't remember which tackle that I saw do it. I made a note of it, but I probably saw it 3 weeks ago. So, and I've seen, 80 guys since then, so I can't remember. But Lane Johnson has that double under, the way he does that, and I actually spoke with Jason Kelsey when he was in our building here about it. And that's incredibly rare. You have to be just incredibly strong to do that. And guys can't really do it. He can do it. And how many times have we seen over the years where guys tried to speed to power Lane Johnson? He did that double under, and he literally just stoned them right in their tracks. I mean, it's like they just stopped, like they ran into a wall. That's really hard to do.
Trey Thomas has actually told us that is a Jeff Stoutland teaching technique. Now, obviously, I don't think Stoutland would teach it to somebody he didn't think could do it, but Mailata and Johnson just have superhuman strength. And Trey has told us before that normally offensive line coaches don't want to teach this.
No, because most guys can't. I would say 98% of guys can't do that.
Right.
Right. But anyway, that got getting off on a tangent a little bit, but just getting back to Will Campbell, I mean, he's sort of the poster child in this draft because, the tape is good. It's 3 years in the SEC. And, it gets into that conversation. Off what you just said, Jeff, about the guys like Simmons and Connelly and Banks, to me, they're left tackles. Like that's not a conversation to me. Those guys are left tackles. Now, I don't know where they're going to get drafted. That's not relevant to me. I'll see on draft night where they get drafted. But there won't be, to me, a conversation about where they play.
Got it.
All right. The next guy's got much better length. Not as highly touted. It's Cameron Williams, Greg, of Texas.
Yeah, he's got some concerns. He had some real struggles at times in pass protection where he just got beat really, really badly, and it just looked really bad. So he's got a massive frame. His arm length is 34.5. He does have athletic movement traits. He can anchor. His good plays are good plays. Like when you watch him, you go, oh, that's really good. But, and he can shut down both power rushers and speed rushers, but he's a little tight in his core and his hips. And, sometimes he just opened the arc meaning the outside, and then he really struggled with balance and body control to seal the edge, and he started to lunge and bend, and there were just reps in which he looked bad. But if you just look at the traits, he certainly has the requisite size and length and power and movement to be a starting right tackle. I just think he's got to be, and I hate to use this word because I hate when people use it, but I would just like to see him more consistently play to what we know he can play to. So I don't, when guys don't do that, I don't know the reason that doesn't happen, but it's there in his body. He can be a quality starting right tackle. He just has too many plays that the fundamental execution falls off and he looks bad.
All right, let's move on to the NC State offensive tackle, probably a day 3 guy, I would think, Anthony Belton.
Yeah. Anthony Belton, there's 2 super intriguing tackles in this draft. Belton is one, and the other is the kid from Boston College, Ozzie Trapillo. Those, to me, are maybe the 2 most intriguing tackle prospects in this draft. I mean, Belton is a huge human being. His arm length is right about 34. His wingspan is over 83. He's fascinating to me. He's got all the needed traits to be a high-level pass protector. When he does it right, I think he looks like the best pass protector in the entire of the guys I've seen. I mean, I haven't seen 100 offensive tackles, but I've seen many. When he does it right with his size, his length, his movement, he just looks like that's the way to do it. Like the best guy. I mean, it looks so good. Obviously he doesn't do that all the time, or we'd be talking about him as a top 15 pick in the draft. He's big. He can be a dominant run blocker as well. I mean, the thing about being as big as he is sometimes even in pass protection, when he got beat early, his sheer size and mass allowed him to recover when he lost technique and control. But I'm not an offensive line coach, but I would think offensive line coaches would like to work with this kid. That would be my sense, because it's there. And when he does it right, man, he just really, really looks good doing it.
And since you mentioned Trapillo, why don't you expand why you think Trapillo,
again, for someone who's not, Mr. O-line guy, he was my favorite guy to watch. I loved watching this kid. I thought Trapillo was a really, really good prospect. And I tell you what he did, and I spoke with an O-line coach about this, and he agreed. He really liked him too. It's funny, when I like a guy and an offensive line coach says, yeah, I do too, that makes me feel really good, because like I said, I don't know every detail of offensive line play. Fortunately in my career, I've been at training camps where I've been 5 feet away from offensive line coaches as they're coaching, and watching every single detail. You guys have seen this, where that, hand placement, if it's 2 inches off, they stop and say that those 2 inches matter. You know how that goes. We've all seen that. But Ozzie Trapillo, to me, I loved watching this kid. Because, one of the things I loved about him is his posture and his stature was so good for a big man. Very rarely did he bend at the waist. Very, very rarely. So his kick slides were really nice in the different pass sets. As I said, he almost never bent at the waist and lunged when he was challenged, and that's something you do not see very often. Now, he's got a tall linear frame, but he was deceptively light and quick on his feet. I thought his hand strikes were really good. I really like this kid a lot. I mean, amazingly enough, his arm length is not good at all for 6'8" and 1/8. It's only 33, which kind of blew me away, because you'd expect a guy over 6'8" to have 35-inch arms. But I think he's still a right tackle for sure. And he was a really good down blocker and combo blocker. He generated force on contact at the first level of the defense. He moved his feet. I thought he was a higher level right tackle prospect, and especially due to his pass protection ability, which may be as strong as any right tackle in this draft class. And I really liked his tape a lot.
Wow. All right. 2 intriguing ones there. Belton and Trapillo. We'll see what happens to them on draft day. Great stuff, Greg. That is going to do it for our look at the offensive tackles in the 2025 NFL Draft. For Greg Cosell and Adam Kaplan, I'm Jeff Mosher. You have been watching the Intel with Greg Cosell.